Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." This is the gospel of Christ. Thanks to God for grace and truth.
So, we've been talking about the temptations that Jesus faced. And we began with the first three that we read about in the Bible, the ones that occur while Jesus is in the desert, being tempted and tested to determine where he's going to go with his life. He is tempted to ignore his spiritual life. He is tempted to try to prove something with certainty, and he is tempted to try to grab power. Last week, I talked also about the temptation that he may have had to give in to anger. But this week, I think there must have been times in Jesus' life when he was tempted to give up. And probably everybody here knows exactly what that means, to be thinking about giving up, to simply quit. Do you think perhaps that is something that Jesus ever thought? Maybe in the middle of the night he woke up and thought, this isn't working, and felt like giving up, or at the end of a long day to say, I don't know if I can do this. And maybe one of his companions would come to him and say, you've done enough. Why don't you let it go? You don't have to do any more than this. But there must have been plenty of times when Jesus did that. Did he ever get discouraged? Did he ever think to himself, oh, I'm just wasting my time. I'm just wasting my time doing this. There's probably times when Jesus thought that either nobody was listening to him or nobody was understanding what he was trying to do, because it was so often that he was either rejected or opposed by people that he was talking to. There's a story in the Bible in which Jesus seems to express this frustration that people aren't getting it. It comes late in his work, and he comes upon his disciples trying to heal a young man. They say he's demon-possessed. When you read the story, you think he's probably got epilepsy, but the disciples are trying to cure him, and they're unable to do it. And Jesus appears and sees that going on, and he says, how long do I have to be with you people? How much longer am I going to put up with you? Bring me the boy. And they bring the boy to Jesus, and Jesus heals him. And you get a glimpse right there that Jesus is probably thinking, I have been talking to you people for 3 years. And that's nothing, because I've been talking to you people for 10 years now. And some of you still don't, well, I won't say that. I was going to say some of you still don't get it, but I think what I mean is some of you still don't agree with me. Not really the same thing. But this frustration must have hit Jesus to think that I've been doing this and you don't get it yet. There's a moment in the Gospel of John where this happens at the Last Supper, where Philip, one of his disciples, says, all we need is for you to show us the Father. And Jesus says, Philip, have I been with you all this time and you still don't understand? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And it seems like one of the most basic concepts that Jesus may have been trying to teach, and yet here is this young man who traveled with him all this time, spent 3 years with him, and still didn't get it. Do you think there were times when Jesus had moments like that, when he said, well, forget it. You people aren't ready. I'm done with it. I'm going to go back to carpentry, because at least the wood does what I tell it to do. There must have been. And then, of course, you know, there was the problem with the authorities, the religious leaders of his time, who just opposed him every step of the way. Every time he appeared, every time he spoke, there was somebody there taking notes and coming back with questions later. And we read in the scriptures that frequently when they came to ask Jesus questions, they weren't trying to find out what he thought about him. They were asking questions to trap him. They wanted to catch him saying something that they could then use against him one way or the other, to turn the people against him or to get the authorities after him. One way or the other, they were trying to get him. And if you've ever had to be working with somebody whose primary goal is to get you, you know how difficult it is. Or if you've been that person who always tries to get someone, you know how destructive that can be. And this was going on for Jesus all the time. And these weren't just, it wasn't just the authorities, it was the religious authorities. It was the people who should have known better that completely resisted him like that. And there must have been times when Jesus was ready to give up. There was also times when Jesus was so desperately alone. He must have thought at times, people want my help, but who is out there trying to help me? There's a story in the Bible where Jesus is exhausted. He has spent time working with the people. He's really had it. And this is when they're still up there in Galilee along the shores of the lake. And he says to his disciples, I'm beat. Get in the boat. Let's all get in the boat and take me to the other side where I can get some rest. So he starts out on the boat across the lake, and the people that he was working with see that he's in a boat and headed across the lake, and they run around to the other side. So when Jesus comes to the other side and gets out of the boat, what does he see? The people that he was trying to get away from are standing there waiting for him. And what would you have done at that moment? Peter, turn the boat around. Take me back over. They won't chase me around a second time. It tells us that Jesus looked at the people and he had compassion on them. He says, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. I can't understand how he could then have gotten out of the boat and moved into that crowd and began to work with the people that were there. But there must have been times when he just was at the end and didn't feel he could do it anymore. And didn't you think he ever felt like giving up at a time like that? Or maybe he just looked around at the place where he was working. The city of Nazareth is about 80,000 people today. It was about 800 people back then. It was nothing. It was a little town and people didn't know anything about it. And he worked, much of his time that he was working, he was walking from village to village around the Sea of Galilee, and not one of these towns was a big town. Most of them are still small. Some of the towns are still there, and they're still small. I don't know if Jesus ever in his life traveled to places like Athens or Rome, the big cities of his time. We don't know if he ever got there. He spent the time that we know about, he spent mostly working in these little backwater towns. It was as if you were going to try to start a movement, a national movement. You were trying to start changing things, and you began your work in, I don't know, Auburn, Maine. A nowhere place. Well, it's not nowhere to us, but other people look at it that way. Do you think Jesus ever got tired of that and wanted to say, listen, if this is where I've got to make this happen, I give up. I mean, if I could go to Rome, if I could go somewhere else and really make a difference where the power is, but no, this is his place. And he maybe gave up. But I think probably when it came right down to the end, that moment when he discovered that Judas was going to betray him, And whether he knew this in advance or not, it's hard to say. Certainly someone as astute as Jesus would have known that here was one of his closest associates, his dearest friends, who was getting ready to turn on him and change. And he must have seen that coming. Or at a time when he realized the authorities were coming to arrest him, and he knew what was going to happen after that. Do you think that there must have been a moment when Jesus realized, let's get out of Dodge. Let's leave. Why fight this any longer? They're coming after us with soldiers. Why go on about this any longer? Let's leave. It's dark. We could get out of town. We could get back to Galilee. You could go back to fishing. Let's cut this out and give up on this right now. He could have said that. And you wonder maybe he was tempted to do so. But he didn't. And we know that that very night Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane and he prayed there. And his prayer was that the path that had been set for him would be changed. That he wouldn't have to go through what it appeared he was going to have to go through. He was asking God to make a change of mind, to let things be different, to release Jesus from this task that was before him. And he must have felt at times like, I cannot do this anymore. And you know that because you have had those moments in your own life where you thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this job. I can't maintain this relationship. I can't reach this person. I can't do it anymore. I've given all I can give. I haven't anything else left in me. There's no more strength left. I'm finished. I quit. Some of you have been to that point. If you haven't, you will. Because it's out there for everyone. And the question is, how much of yourself are you expected to give to others? And that is a very difficult question to answer. It's extremely hard to answer. And maybe looking at the life of Jesus doesn't help us, because how much of himself did Jesus give? How much? All of it. Everything. Right down to the last of his blood. I don't know if that's the challenge that sits before us. I don't know. I know that sometimes it is the right thing for a person to do to quit, to give up, to move away from a particular situation. I think sometimes we have to do that. I think sometimes churches have to do that too. There's a church, in Portland, Maine right now that decided they'd gotten down to about a dozen members. They had a big, huge old building, and they decided to give up and sell it. And that building is now a restaurant where you can sit and have drinks and eat fattening food while looking at the stained glass windows all around you. And the name of that restaurant is Grace. Well, sometimes it's time for churches to give up. Nothing lasts forever, and it's a hard time to know when that moment is. It's a temptation that is so clear. But it was a temptation that Jesus passed up, because it had become clear to him that what he was about to do was for everyone. That the things that were going to happen to him over the next hours were going to change the world. And he had to carry that load. It is a temptation that Jesus resisted. And it's a temptation that we have to figure out, and we have to talk to each other about it and come to understand and learn when is it time to let go, because sometimes that comes. But let us not do it before we should. And let us not do it the first time we think about it. Let us figure out where can we go, how much can we give, and God will honor that with actual grace. God will be with us as we make that decision, and God will be graceful with us. It won't just be a meal on a plate. It'll be the real thing, the grace that comes within us that helps us to know it's time to keep going or it's time to let go. We'll figure it out together. God will help us. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.